Thank you, Harold, and it is great to be here with my brothers and sister firefighters. How many are here from New York? Raise your hands. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. I always start off by telling a story. Now, God willing, my dad will turn 96 June 14th. He was born on Flag Day. And my mom's alive, she's 90, and if they live till another 3 weeks, April 3rd, they'll be celebrating their 70th anniversary. So this is a story dedicated to my dad. Well, my mom and dad, but particularly my dad. So my dad was an exterminator, and he struggled his whole life. He lived to 90, he's 95 and a half, so DDT didn't do too bad to him. My sister once sent him a Father's Day card, in fact, that said, "Dad, we're the only family that associates the smell of love with DDT," because he'd come home from work reeking of all the chemicals. But anyway, he retired at age 70. He hated his job. But then he retired, and my brother, who's the financially successful Schumer, bought them a little house in Florida. So every winter they'd drive down, and, you know, when they got there, they had a great time. They saw their friends who had moved there. He never played golf before he started playing golf. But as they got older, he couldn't play golf anymore. Many of their friends had passed, so they needed something to do. So Florida Atlantic University allows any senior citizen to enroll in any course for free. So every Thursday at 4 p.m., they would roll up to Florida Atlantic University, and because they enrolled in the course called humor. Now, what was the course called humor? Some erstwhile comedian who never made it in the Catskills would get up and tell jokes for 45 minutes, different one each week. My dad never went to college. He said, "Gee, college is pretty easy. I should have gone." But they'd call me every week with their favorite joke, so this is one of them. Mrs. Walters is brought before the judge, and he rolls his eyes. "Mrs. Walters, you're back." "Yes, Your Honor, I'm back." "And Mrs. Walters, what did you steal this time?" "Oh, Your Honor, I stole a can of peaches from the supermarket down the road." The judge is exasperated. He says, "Look, Mrs. Walters, I know you're a kleptomaniac. I know this is an illness. I know you can't help yourself. You could easily afford a can of peaches. But for Lord's sake, this is the 17th time you've been brought before me for shoplifting this year, and it's only March. I have no choice. I got to sentence you to some time in jail." "Now, how many peaches were in the can, Mrs. Walters?" "Your Honor, there were 4 peaches in the can. And I have no choice. I'm going to sentence you to 4 nights in jail, 1 for each peach." He's about to bang the gavel, pronounce sentence, and a gentleman in the middle of the courtroom gets up all agitated. He says, Your Honor, may it please the court. I'm a husband. She also stole a can of peas." So when you all retire and go to Florida, you can enroll in Florida Atlantic University and call your children back with jokes. Now, I have always loved our firefighters, always. I live next door to a New York firefighter, now deceased, named Joe Noble. And since my dad worked, and I spent a lot of time at the Noble household, and I learned that when Mary Noble would get a call in the afternoon, every call, there'd be a little worry through her. She hopes it wasn't the call she'd always dreaded. Because your families always, they live with your fight and your struggle. They know the importance of the job you do. And it's not an easy job, as Fitzpatrick and everyone else says. You are like our soldiers. Our soldiers across the country, across the world, all of our armed forces, they risk their lives for our safety. You are our domestic soldiers. You risk your lives for our safety. And so I have been in your corner ever since. I know a lot of firefighters, hang out with them, and so much respect the job you do and how important it is to communities across America. As Harold mentioned, I've been with you all the way, and what a great job Harold Schaitberger does. He is relentless, relentless. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. His jokes aren't that good. They're not as good as mine, Harold. But he does an amazing job for you. He's on the phone with me almost every week, pushing for the things that you need, and you believe him, and he is so effective. And of course, Ed Kelly as well, and your whole leadership deserves your thanks and America's thanks for what they do for firefighters. And Harold alerted me to your problems immediately, and I've been working with them ever since. The first year I got into the Senate, we passed the federal grant program for the first time called AFG. That's delivered tens of hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment because we learned how the equipment is much better. It saves lives, but it's expensive. Not just a ladder or a pumper, but all the other devices. I love the one, I always forget what it's called. You know, you can thermal imaging, show it to a wall, and you know exactly where the heat is, so you don't have to knock down the whole wall. But these cost, what, about $20,000 a device? So we passed this law, and then we realized with all the cutbacks in localities, but our communities could not afford to have fewer firefighters, another law I worked hard to pass was the SAFER grant, which allowed municipalities to hire thousands of firefighters over the years. And it helps our big departments, but it also helps our little departments. You know, we have a department in Newburgh. They lose 5 firefighters because of budget cuts, and the people are not safe. So the fire grant, the SAFER grant rather, can get that done. Now, I'm a labor guy. I believe in union labor. That's what lifted my family outside of poverty. I like to tell stories. I'll tell you one other little story. So my grandfather came to America in 1892. He was one of 18. Same wife. That's how they did it in the old days. And of course, they were deeply religious. And the first commandment of God to man in the Bible is what God said to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. So that's what he did. But they were so poor over there in Europe that they couldn't support all these kids. So the 3 youngest came to America in 1892, and they were supposed to be raised by an uncle, but the uncle was a ne'er-do-well. So my grandfather would sleep in doorways, steal apples from the push carts. He never learned to read or write. He left after the first grade. But one night it's pouring rain, and he's looking for a place to go to shelter, and he sees all these people going into this nice building. So he follows them. He doesn't know what it is. Well, what was the building? It was the Labor Temple, built by the unions to teach the Irish and German and Italian and Jewish immigrants about the union movement, because they didn't have any over there in Europe. And who's speaking? This great orator, Eugene V. Debs. So he gets religion. And he teaches himself to read and write. And he became an organizer. He was one of the founders of the Paper Workers Union up in Utica, New York. But World War II happens, and there's no more union organizers. My father enlisted, flew the hump over the Himalaya Mountains. And so he bought a little exterminating business in Brooklyn from a German American who was sure the Nazis were going to bomb New York, and this guy was moving to Montana. It had 3 workers. And you know the first thing my grandfather did? He told the 3 workers how to form a union to ask them for more money. He's the only boss. He's the only boss whose picture was in a union hall as one of the founders of the union, the Pest Control Union. So I've been a union guy through and through. And this idea to tear down unions, we wonder why the middle class is struggling these days. Well, 35% of America was unionized in 1980, the heyday. But since then, because they've hired a lot of lawyers who know how to undo unions, the new businesses have had trouble putting in unions, and it's the #1 reason the middle class is not as strong as it once was. Thank God you have a strong union that protects you. And if you want to know the number one way to build back the middle class, strengthen the union movement. No right to work. None of this bullshit. None of this bull. None of this bull. So you know I'll stick with you through thick and thin, do everything I can to help you. We're working on a lot of things now. Of course, your health and safety. We just passed the registry. That was your idea, IAFF's idea. What we learned from 9/11, and I'll talk a little bit about 9/11, is that the new buildings that are built have all kinds of different things in them. It's not just wood or steel, but all kinds of modern things, plastics and this and that. And when they burn, the stuff gets in the air and then gets into your systems. And that's why we have seen, not just of the people who bravely ran to the towers at 9/11, but throughout America, every firehouse I go to, there's some guy, 45 years old, who's getting a kind of cancer that 45-year-olds never got before. And it's in large part because of you rushing to danger, as you do, and all this stuff is in the air that never used to be. So the first great step is the firefighter registry. So we can track this down around the country. It's voluntary. Nobody has to be part of it. That's how we did it. It's anonymous. No one's going to know. But they'll have a big record around the country of who's getting what kind of cancers and what kind of buildings they may have gone into. And it will help us learn how to we abolished that thing that was in, I forgot what it's called, pajamas and furniture. They said it retarded burning, and it retarded the lives of the firefighters. Flame retardant. Yeah, the flame retardants. But we can do that for a lot more. And maybe eventually we'll get to do what we've done for 9/11. And firefighters who have this will get the kind of medical care, regardless of what the locality says, but 100% full and complete and best medical care to deal with this issue. I want to congratulate Harold and all of you for taking on the issue of mental health. We all know about PTSD overseas, but as I said, you're our soldiers. It's not an easy job. And some people get PTSD or other types of things, and that has been sort of a little secret. And now getting some funding for mental health for firefighters is very important. I'm working hard in my state of New York to get new funding for specialized mental health centers. You opened up that great center. Harold deserves a lot of credit in your leadership in Maryland. And we have to focus on that issue. And then, of course, PFAS. We all know this is one of the chemicals I'm talking about. We've had it in my state of New York. The town of Newburgh, which I mentioned, their water supply is gone because the PFAS went in there. Hoosick Falls, this was a company, a big chemical company, Hoosick Falls in Petersburg. Their water is all contaminated. Suffolk County, out there at Zabreski, because PFAS was in firefighting foam for 40 years, and we got to deal with it. We are going to pass legislation so that the Department of Defense, which has used so much of this, and other private sector who have used this, will take responsibility and deal with the health of those firefighters and those communities who have been hurt by PFAS, and we're going to get that done. Finally, the VCF. I knew people, firefighters, who passed away. In fact, I used to play basketball. We weren't very good. Our team's motto at Madison was, we may be small, but we're slow. And until I was about 50, I would go play choose-up games in New York. But now I ride my bike all over the place. I can't run because of my knees from playing basketball. And one of my favorite rides is to go down to Coney Island. And they have a wall of the 238 firefighters who were lost 9/11. And I go touch the names of some of the people I knew right in my neighborhood, then Lieutenant Stackpool, so many others. I used to go around with Stackpool like so many firefighters, a principled, dedicated man, and we'd go around asking people to donate blood, telling young people how important it was to learn to donate blood. But anyway, we got the VCF done, and I helped. I was one of the leaders legislatively, but without our firefighters coming down to Washington and telling their stories, we never would have got it done. Because frankly, you were far more persuasive than we were about needing that VCF. One of my heroes, who just passed away, was the great Ray Pfeiffer. I don't know how many of you got to know Ray, but Ray rushed to the towers like so many other firefighters. He breathed in all that toxic dust and ash and was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer. He would come down in his wheelchair. He had that breathing apparatus in his nose. He had a rough time speaking, but he wouldn't let a senator go by until he told them what had happened and what we had to do about it. He passed a few years ago, but I'll never forget him sitting in front of Mitch McConnell's office. He camped out in his wheelchair till McConnell came out, which he had to, and he confronted him. McConnell would usually back out the back door, not to see Ray after that. But Ray was just incredible, and so were so many others. And so we got the VCF done, but it's run out of money because there are so many more people who have these illnesses from the toxic ash and dust than we thought. And now they're beginning to say, well, maybe you'll get 50% of what you're entitled to. Maybe you'll get 30% of what you're entitled to. As we say in Brooklyn, NFW. You all know what that means? First word is no, and the last word is way. Anyway, we're going to get this done like we got the fund passed, like we made the health benefits permanent, and now we will get the fund made permanent, so you'll never have to come back and ask for it. And as I said, our goal is to do this eventually for firefighters across the country now that we have the registry. So I love you. I think you do amazing work. Ben Franklin, the proposer of the first fire company in America, he wrote in 1735, being old and lame of hands, and thereby incapable of assisting my fellow citizens when their houses are on fire, I must beg them to take in good part the following hints. And what he did was propose that there be fire departments. That great man, who's done so many great things, was amazing. Well, let me expand on Franklin. Being incapable of assisting my fellow citizens when their houses are on fire, instead, I promise to do everything in my power to assist those of you who can, you and your members. I will always have your back as long as God breathes air in my lungs. Thank you, God bless you, and keep up the great work.